Well, my dear sirs and madams, if I told you 45969, what would you say? You would say, of course, that this is the code of the new build in the Dragonflight beta. This build, with this new fancy code, is bringing us more balance tuning to several of the specs. As far as my counting goes, we have 12 at least different specs getting changed, with at least half of these being nerfs. Now, it's worth mentioning that at the moment we actually don't know how powerful each spec is, so getting nerfed might as well just be necessary for many of these specs, because we are quite unbalanced and things are quite wacky in the beta. However, once we go by the changes that have been happening in the beta of Dragonflight, we can immediately start with a very different divide between two specs of the same class, because we are talking about Death Knight. While Blood has been completely left alone in a corner, Frost and Unholy Death Knight have received the complete opposite treatment, because one of them has been buffed significantly while the other has been nerfed significantly. The buffed one in question is Frost Death Knight, the nerfed one is Unholy Death Knight. So Frost has been buffed in numbers. If you remember the statement from Blizzard, they were now going to start thinking more about numbers tuning and tuning the talents and abilities themselves rather than changing the talents, than moving around the talents, etc, etc. So most of these buffs for Frost Death Knight, like damage increases to many of their core abilities. Obliterate, Howling Blast, Breath of Sindragosa, Remorseless Winter, Frost Strike are basically the 5 buttons are going to be clicking every time, and those have all been buffed. It's not just there, you also have a few more talents turned into abilities as well, like Pillar of Frost getting buffed, Frost Sight, your AoE version of your spender getting buffed, Frigid Executioner, Piercing Chill, all getting buffed across the board. Unholy, as we said, gets the reverse treatment. The majority of their abilities, including core abilities for your rotation, like Death Coil, like Clawing Shadows, or Scourge Strike, like Festering Wound, Raise Dead for your ghoul pet, are all getting nerfed. Even certain power-ups, even certain buffs, like certain cooldowns, like Unholy Pact, no longer giving you 5% flat strength when you use it. The only minor change which can be considered a buff across this sea of nerfs for Unholy is that Commander of the Dead, the talent which makes your Dark Transformation also empower your Army of the Dead ghouls, has been increased from 30% damage to 35% more damage, and Commander of the Dead will now apply to ghouls who were still being summoned in by Army of the Dead when Dark Transformation was pressed. That was pretty much the only tiny positive change to the other nerfs of Unholy, together with Summon Gargoyle having increased damage. The rest for Unholy has been majority of nerfs to their base abilities. There was a very tiny, very small, almost undetected change for Demon Hunter, but it is actually quite substantial, because the change to Demon Hunter is that Sigil of Silence, so your AoE Silence Sigil, which was in the general tree for Demon Hunter, so available to Havoc as well, Sigil of Silence has been moved to the Vengeance tree as a choice node. This, in other words, mean that Vengeance Demon Hunter is the only one that will be able to have an AoE silence, just like in Shadowlands. So Havoc Demon Hunter lost the utility, the possibility of taking the AoE silence for themselves, which is quite a significant change when it comes to the things you can bring in Mythic Plus for a Havoc Demon Hunter in this case. We do have a decent amount of changes to Druids as a whole, particularly to Feral and to Restoration Druid as well. Balance Druid doesn't get too much, it gets a couple of talents redesigned, but for the moment Blizzard is likely still monitoring the heavy rework that Balance Druid just received, so they are not quite yet into the tuning of the numbers. Where they are in the tuning of the numbers is with Feral Druid. Feral Druid has been nerfed across the board. So it starts well, it starts nice, because you read that Rip has gotten 10% more damage, Trash 25% more damage, Rake 25% more damage at the cost of Ferocious Bite getting nerfed by 10%. Blizzard then explains why when you use Convoke the Spirits, your Ferocious Bites will be capped as if you were spending 4 combo points instead of 5, because they were pointing out that Ferocious Bite was too much. It was too big of a portion of your Convoke the Spirits damage, so they wanted to to do less damage. They didn't want to reduce the amount of times you casted it inside Convoke, because it was still too much damage to miss out on, but just to have less combo points when you use it. Besides that, however, the rest of the stuff is going to be just nerfs. Many of your talents, like Tireless Energy for energy recovery, has been nerfed. Sabertooth for Ferocious Bite bonus damage has been nerfed. Dreadful Bleeding for your damage bonus to your bleeds. Frenzied Assault and Tear Open Wounds, both talents synergizing with your bleed damage, also have been nerfed. Rampant Ferocity and Blood Talons as well have been nerfed. So overall, across the board, Feral gets a bunch of damage nerfs. Once again, I wouldn't be too disappointed if I were a Feral Druid, because you still had no idea where was their damage. You know, for all you know, Feral Druid was doing 50% more damage than any other spec right now. So perhaps this is what Blizzard has been trying to do to Feral Druid. Meanwhile, Resto Druid, I guess it gets a neutral set of change, and when I say neutral, I mean there are some buffs, but there are also some nerfs. Of particular interest is yet another nerf to Nurturing Dormancy. Remember that this talent used to be 3-second extensions to Rejuvenation up to 9 seconds. Then it was nerfed to 2-second extensions up to 6, and now it's finally been nerfed to 1-second extensions up to 3-second extensions. So it's now been nerfed 2 times, it's now a third of the power it used to have before. Wild Growth as well continues to be nerfed. Now Wild Growth is healing for less, and it's also falling off a little bit faster than before overall for Resto Druid. As I said, there are a few buffs here and there, like the buff to Verdancy. The extra healing you can get after you have casted Wild Growth has been buffed. The Embrace the Dream healing has been buffed. Overall, as I said, it's a neutral change, perhaps leaning a little bit towards more nerfs than buffs overall for Restoration Druid. There are not many changes to Mage. Don't get confused if you see things like these or someone mentioning things like these which look like a lot of nerfs, really. It's just a redistribution of damage, because Frost Mage's damage aura around the class was negative, so it's been brought back to 0, and as a result, as a balancing, then some of the abilities have gotten their damage reduced, but it's not really changing anything in their spec. What is changing is a buff to Monks. Not to Brewmaster, not to Windwalker, this time is Mistweaver Monk that gets buffed, and the buff is in the damage, because Rising Sun Kick has its damage increased by 25% for Mistweavers, Tiger Palm has its damage increased by 40%, and Blackout Kick has its damage increased by 20% for Mistweaver Monks. Now ask yourselves this: could this be a proper balance tuning video if we didn't have a wall of text for Shadow Priests? Of course not, of course. Shadow Priest gets its weekly wall of text in terms of changes, once again, throughout the beta of Dragonflight. Many of these changes are quite simple. The overall insanity generation of Shadow Priest has been nerfed. Pretty much everything that gives you insanity for Priest has been nerfed by 33 or 50% in how much insanity you can generate. As a result, some of your abilities have been buffed in damage. Mindseer has been buffed by a whooping 115%, Devouring Plague, your other finisher for Insanity, has been buffed by 30%, Void Bolt has been buffed by 80%, so there has been an exchange here. You're exchanging, generating less Insanity over time with doing more damage with your abilities. So it's overall, I would say it's a buff given how much Insanity it was generating before anyways, and now instead your abilities just flat out hit for more. We will have to see though how it is going to play out eventually with these changes for Shadow Priest. There is a tiny annoying nerf for Subtlety Rogue. The annoying nerf is that Shadow Dance, which used to last 10 seconds, was nerfed to last 6 seconds, with Blizzard saying, don't worry, Subtlety Rogues, we are giving you this talent, this 2-rank talent, which can increase the duration of your Shadow Dance by 2 to 4 seconds. So if you take that talent, then your Shadow Dance goes back to having a 10-second duration, just like before. Now that talent has been nerfed. Instead of 2 to 4 seconds, it has been brought back to a 1 to 2 seconds extension. So now you have, at best, an 8 seconds long Shadow Dance for Subtlety. The main change for Rogue, however, is the removal, complete removal of the talent Restless Crew. One of the much talked about party buff talents that might have made the spec mandatory in the raid if this turned out to be OP, well, then now it's not a question anymore because it's been removed from the game. Also, for Outlaw Rogues, It's not really that bad, because if you remember, in case you have forgotten, Atrophic Poison, the 3% damage reduction poison that was assassination only, has been made available to all of the rogue specs in the general tree. So now, don't worry, you still have a reason to be a mandatory spec, you still have a reason to be brought into the raid with Atrophic Poison. You didn't need Restless Crew as well to be brought along. You do have some quality of life though, because Between the Eyes is now baseline for you, so you no longer have to spend a talent for Between the Eyes. Instead, you get back something that you had before, a legendary that you had before. Improved Between the Eyes, critical hits with Between the Eyes deal 4 times normal damage. That's your new option in place of Between the Eyes, which goes to be baseline. Some of your cooldowns have been increased to combat the very fast cooldown reduction you get as an Outlaw Rogue with the Restless Blades. Keep It Rolling and Dread Blades have gotten their cooldown increased from 5 to 7 and from 1.5 to 2 minutes cooldown for Outlaw. Those are the changes for Rogue. There is a tiny minor change only for Shaman, and that is the numbers now on Mana Spring Totem. Unfortunately, the dream of making this a mandatory buff for Shamans to have a reason to be brought into the raid is now gone, because Mana Spring Totem will now only affect 1 player at a time. So you can't bring 3 Shamans using 3 Mana Spring Totems and working all 3 at the same time on the same players. Now players can only benefit from 1 Mana Spring Totem at a time. At least now we know the number. It's 200 mana. Whenever you use your main ability, your Lava Burst or your Riptide or your Storm Strike, 200 mana is what you get back with Mana Spring Totem. Lastly, we have a whole list of changes to warriors. Blizzard is pointing out that their focus continues to be fixing and tuning, and in particular the rage economy across the warrior class. We are purposely taking a measured approach here, as we feel all 3 specs are in fun places to play, and part of that is due to the availability of rage. In turn, all 3 specializations feel the rage economy reduced a small amount in this update, which is what you're going to be seeing in the changes for Arms, Fury and Protection. The majority of the stuff when it comes to rage generation is getting nerfed for the 3 specs of warrior. There are a few positive things here and there still, like for example Raging Blow damage being increased by 8% and Crushing Blow damage increased by 3% for Fury Warrior, or tiny things like improved Overpower, increasing the damage of Overpower by 10% instead of 5%. The majority of that though is just going to be rage stuff. Odin's Fury is going to generate less rage, like Booming Voice is going to generate less rage, Champion's Bulwark is going to generate less rage, Impenetrable Wall and Heavy Repercussions are going to give your Shield Slam less rage. So the majority of the tuning for Warrior has just gone towards lowering the amount of rage you can gain, to a similar degree to lowering the amount of insanity Shadow Priest is gaining. In this build of the beta, the nerfs are very similar for both Warrior and Priest. So this is what we had for today in the balance tuning. We have gotten the changes which were primarily nerfs for Unholy, for Feral Druid, for Subtlety Rogue, and for the 3 Warrior specs getting tuned down in the regeneration. Frost Decay and the damage of Mistweaver Monk were the 2 outliers in terms of buffs received, and then we had some neutral, half and half changes for Resto Druid and for Shadow Priest in this build of the beta. There are a few more things we will be able to go over in the next couple of days of interesting changes happening in the beta, but for now the video has gone on long enough when it comes to pointing out the changes in this build. As always, it is worth remembering that we still don't quite know ourselves how powerful the specs are, so we don't really have much of a point of comparison with these buffs and these nerfs. We don't really know if Frost Decay is getting buffed across the board because it was doing less damage than tanks, or if Unholy is getting nerfed because it was doing triple damage than everyone else. That's something that for now only Blizzard can tell, so it's gonna take a while for us to also figure that out. For now, this is what we have for the balance tuning on this Friday. As usual, round of applause, of course, to all of the Patreon supporters helping me and supporting myself and this channel to continue to provide you with WoW content. If you also want to support without having to spend any money whatsoever, you can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. That is always and will always be free for everyone to do. Lastly, for some more social interactions and general simping, you can follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribing to my Patreon right down at these two links. Okay, we are done now. It's time to leave. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon. And in the meantime, I hate it. I hate it when I thought I had something in the fridge and then I go there and I realize it's not there. And now I don't want to go out to buy that stuff. Shit.